3 days, 6 fights, one ancient Vietnamese wrestling festival. I trained, I competed, and I got humbled. But I learned something more important than simply winning. This is the story of my time inside Đấu Vật, the Vietnamese traditional wrestling martial arts, and the festival where fighters compete not just for glory, but for the honour of their village, their ancestors, and to preserve their art for future generations. This tradition is thought to have originated in Liễu Đôi Village, which is in Hà Nam province, just west of Hanoi. Legend has it that the style was created more than 1,000 years ago by a warrior called Đoàn, who was sent off to war. One day he came across this sacred sword that blessed him with supernatural strength. He fought against different invading empires. When he returned to his village, he saw that his people were suffering at the hands of cruel overlords, so he taught them this style of wrestling that he'd developed and trained in his military years to help protect them for the future. Traditionally, soldiers would return home around the New Year festival, and at this time they would partake in games and competitions, and of course wrestling was among them. For the sake of full disclosure, this was actually a few years ago when I entered the festival. At the time I had very little experience with grappling or wrestling, primarily being a striker. That has since changed, but for the sake of these videos, this is what you're going to see. I visited Liễu Đôi Village 1 month before the festival, where I met this guy called Ling. Ling was a former professional wrestler and a native of the village, and he agreed to give me a few pointers. I met him in this small, concrete shack, which was basically in the middle of this rice field. Inside, the floor was covered in rice husks and with a blue tarpaulin pulled over the top. This was their local training hall, so they could practice come all weather. He taught me through some of the ins and outs of his local wrestling style. There were definitely a few familiar moves. They have things like fireman throws, single leg and double leg takedowns. Some of these I recognised from other martial arts. Some of them I hadn't experienced before. So we drilled all of these moves. We got sweaty, covered in dust and insect bites. Straight away I could see I was going to be utterly outclassed in the competition, but I would rather go there for the experience and to get involved than necessarily to win. Then we said farewell to Ling, and I told them I would be back in about a month's time, and in the meantime I would actually go home and practice. The day before the festival began, I drove my motorbike from Hanoi. At the edge of the village we met a guy named Thuy. He is the local council representative and also the village's TV repairman. He agreed to put us up for a few days because in Vietnamese tradition everyone is really welcoming at this time of year. We spent that evening looking around some of the village, getting to know some of the locals. We had a big feast with his family and a whole bunch of these different wrestlers from the village. We drank rice wine and we sang karaoke. Then we had to go and get an early night because I was told we were going to get up very early. So the next morning I was awoken to the sound of clanging as villagers walked round with cymbals, getting everyone up and ready to join the parade. The whole village met in the Soi Vật, or the wrestling arena in the centre of town, and then there was a parade coming out of the village and walking about 1 kilometre through the rice fields to the shrine of Đoàn at the edge of the village. As we arrived, the village elders in their ceremonial gear burned incense. They offered lucky money and plates of food at the shrine for their ancestor. Once the blessings were completed, this line of 1,000 strong people marched back towards the village to begin the wrestling festival. So all of the people grouped into their main areas, and two of the village elders performed this dance with long spears and halberds for a special ceremony called Chai Rod, where the fathers or the grandfathers of the youngest sons born in the village had to wrestle to gain prosperity and luck. This was a symbolic bout where neither person was actually allowed to hit the floor, because if they were to go down, that meant bad luck for them. Then, with no more ceremony, the first fights began. These started with the children from each village wrestling each other. It was funny to see because some of them were only 5 or 6 years old, but already had a good grasp of some basic wrestling fundamentals, probably more so than I did. Then, by mid-morning, the first real competitive fights began. I was one of the first up, so because I was a lot bigger than many of the competitors, they paired me up with quite a big guy. We wrestled for a few minutes, no one particularly having the upper hand. Then he tripped me and I went down backwards, but somehow managed to roll him over my shoulder, and so I actually won my first match. So then there were some more matches, mostly at the lower levels, weeding out the beginners. Ling was among one of the winners, as was Chuang, a friend of his and another former professional wrestler that I had met. Then in my second match, I ended up going against someone who was far more skilled than my first opponent. We kind of grappled, then he suddenly dived at my legs, took both of them out, and I hit the ground hard. Fortunately, I was one fight up, so for the first day, I had made it through alive. So that night, after the wrestling had finished, Ling and Chuang, who was still in his suit from earlier in the day, decided I needed a few more pointers. So we gathered in the arena once everyone had gone home, and they taught me through a few more techniques I could use and some things that might help me do a little better the next day. By this point, I was exhausted. It'd been a long day, up since dawn, but they were determined that I would do well. If you're enjoying this video so far, don't forget to give it a like or drop me a comment below. I want to know what experience with wrestling or grappling that you have. Day 2 started bright and early again. There were a few kids and teenagers matches as the villagers slowly filed in and filled up the arena. Once everyone had arrived, there was a special treat as well, because now the 2 oldest wrestlers in the village would fight. These 2 old guys were 84 and 87 years old. While they weren't exactly going hard at their age, it was still pretty amazing to see that they would even step into the ring at this age. It's a real testament to the importance placed upon wrestling in villages like this. My mentors Ling and Chuang continued to prosper that day. I won my first match, which was against another not so skilled but quite heavy guy. I managed just to straight up lift him off the ground, and that got me through. My next fight was up against a guy who I was told had a fearsome reputation as a wrestler, and this reputation turned out to be accurate, because the moment we started fighting, I made one move and he dived down, grabbed both my legs, threw me to the ground and lifted them up into the air. Just like that, I was out of the competition. Finally, for the last match of the day, we were treated to a special performance. This was where Ling and Chuang led a traditional bout. There was no time limit, there were no rules, there was no winner or loser. They simply flow wrestled for close to 10 minutes, each delivering different throws, techniques, grabs and locks. This was really interesting because it was much more like how the soldiers traditionally would have trained. They didn't just lift someone up and it was done. They flowed until someone had dominant control, or until they found an opening to follow up with different techniques. All in all, it was a tremendous display of the traditional aspects of the art. Day 3 started with the semi-finals before moving to the finals. Ling and Chuang both had successes. Chuang was knocked out, so Ling was facing another strong former professional in the final. Surprisingly, he won quite quickly. I thought it all seemed a bit abrupt, and I was right, because the competition wasn't over yet. Ling was given a red bandana symbolising his strength. He sat in a chair in the centre of the ring, and there he was set to be challenged by 5 more opponents back to back. Anyone he'd fought previously was allowed to re-challenge him to try and prove it wasn't just a fluke, or any of his friends could give him a go. 5 opponents came up, and one after another, he slammed, lifted and threw until he was declared the grand winner of the competition. They presented him with a sprig of bamboo symbolising spring, a bag of salt symbolising food and prosperity, and a small red envelope with like a token sum of money to symbolise wealth. And then finally there was the closing ceremonies. The village elders gathered in the hut by the arena where they drank tea and we talked about the tradition. They shared with me some of the stories of different wrestlers. One in particular stuck with me, and it was talking about a former wrestler who got a bad neck injury. He was basically paralysed from the neck down. Still, he would return year after year to watch the fights and be involved in the tradition. Then of course, before I left, we were all invited back to Thui's house where we had a big feast. It was this real party atmosphere that embodies Vietnam at the Lunar New Year festival. This great, welcoming, joyful celebration. So what did I learn from the festival? I learned that Đấu Vật is more than just a sport, it's more than just a martial art even. It's like the heartbeat of the village, passed down from father to son across generations. And it was an amazing experience to be involved and to be welcomed so well into this community. So that's all. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you found it interesting, you can check out my book, The Martial Arts of Vietnam. It has information about wrestling and a whole bunch of other styles, including the history and the culture surrounding martial arts in the region. I'll put the link in the description below so you can grab a copy. Otherwise, please like the video and drop me a comment below letting me know about your experience with wrestling or with grappling, or subscribe to the channel where we'll have weekly videos about martial arts. Speaking of which, you can check out one of my latest videos about the best martial art for beginners by clicking on the link here.